altitude 1,500 feet, above the turquoise expanse of the Caribbean Sea. Through the drone's infrared optics, the ocean below looked deceptively calm. Yet beneath that blue veil, tension simmered like a coiled serpent. The U.S. Navy's USS Porter, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer equipped with SM-6 missiles, ESSM Phalanx, CIWS, and Aegis radar, sailed what Washington called a routine patrol. Captain Douglas Hayes watched the tactical display as faint, erratic contacts appeared, too many closing fast. Venezuela's Bolivarian Navy had increasingly embraced asymmetric tactics, fast attack craft, improvised missile boats, and loitering attack drones. At 0400 local time, radar blips multiplied, then vanished into sea clutter before reappearing at higher speed. On deck, sailors tightened straps, powered up CIWS, and prepared missile tubes, while sonar teams scanned for acoustic returns. Below decks, technicians rerouted power to electronic warfare suites as commanders measured options against rules of engagement. Unseen by the crew, a coordinated swarm of high-speed boats and kamikaze drones threaded a wake of darkness toward the destroyer. The trap was precise. 0402 hours. The first explosion ripped through the ocean's stillness like thunder. A blinding flash illuminated the USS Porter's starboard side, an incoming drone detonating just short of impact, sending shards of molten debris slashing across the deck. The blast wave rocked the destroyer, alarms screamed, and red emergency lights flooded the bridge. Within seconds, the calm blue Caribbean turned into a boiling arena of chaos and fire. The Venezuelan attack had begun. 12 fast assault boats modified with Chinese-made C-701 anti-ship missiles and Iranian Shahed-style kamikaze drones surged toward the destroyer from multiple vectors. Each craft moved erratically, using sea clutter and decoy drones to confuse the Aegis radar. The electronic warfare console aboard Porter struggled to separate real threats from noise. As the swarm fractured into smaller units, one closing from the south, another skimming along the waves from the east. Multiple bogies inbound low altitude. 30 knots and climbing, shouted the tactical officer. The Porter's Phalanx CIWS guns roared to life, spraying tungsten rounds into the dark horizon. Streams of tracers carved bright arcs across the stormy night, striking two drones mid-flight. They exploded in twin spheres of orange light, casting eerie reflections across the waves. But for every target destroyed, three more emerged, darting in unpredictable patterns. At 0404 hours, Venezuela's command center in Puerto Cabello monitored the operation in real time. The attack was being coordinated via encrypted satellite uplink real-time drone feeds transmitting directly to Venezuelan Fleet Command. Commodore Alejandro Rivas, orchestrator of the mission, watched the screen coldly. His plan was simple, but devastating: overwhelm the destroyer's defenses with volume, force it to expend ammunition, and strike its weak points once systems were saturated. Back aboard the Porter, countermeasures launched chaff clouds, infrared flares, and electronic jamming. The destroyer's Aegis system fired two SM-2 missiles in rapid succession. Trails of smoke split the sky as the warheads arced upward, seeking heat signatures from the incoming boats. One missile found its mark, vaporizing a Venezuelan missile craft in a plume of fire. But the others pressed on undeterred. 0406 hours. Another explosion, this time closer. A suicide drone slammed into the port bow, detonating near the forward VLS cells. The blast hurled sailors off their feet. Hull plates buckled, smoke poured from the impact site, and secondary fires ignited near the radar mast. The destroyer's internal fire suppression systems engaged, automatically flooding compartments with foam. Above, two U.S. Navy Seahawk helicopters scrambled from the Porter's aft deck, rotors slicing through smoke as they ascended into the storm. Their mission: locate and eliminate the attackers before they could regroup. Each Seahawk carried AGM-114 Hellfire missiles and 20mm cannons, lightweight but lethal against small, fast-moving targets. By now, the entire Caribbean battle space was alive with chaos. Radar jamming filled the airwaves. Venezuelan drones, some carrying explosives, others serving as decoys, buzzed the American formation, forcing the destroyer's sensors to split focus. Within 10 minutes, over 60 separate contacts had been logged. The Porter's crew fought with precision, but exhaustion was setting in. Every decision carried the weight of potential escalation. In Washington, D.C., the Pentagon's Situation Room came alive. Analysts confirmed that an American warship had been attacked near the Venezuelan exclusion zone. The president was briefed within minutes. On the live feed, flashes of gunfire streaked across the night like lightning bolts over dark water. A senior advisor muttered, "This isn't a skirmish. This is a statement." Back at sea, Captain Hayes regained his footing amid the chaos. "Damage control teams, to forward deck. Prepare for counterstrike," he barked. His face glistened with sweat and seawater as he studied the tactical board. The ship's radar signature was now partially degraded. The SPY-1 arrays were running on auxiliary power. The Venezuelan swarm had forced Porter into a defensive crouch, a modern David besieged by mechanical Goliaths. At 0410 hours, the destroyer executed a hard starboard turn, repositioning to bring its full battery of Mark 45 naval guns to bear. Shells thundered, streaking across the water to obliterate two attacking boats. The air reeked of cordite and burning oil. But even as the U.S. guns spoke, another wave of drones appeared, smaller, faster, flying just above the wave tops. The Venezuelan operators had adapted mid-battle. They switched to low-frequency communication, bypassing American jamming fields and coordinated pincer movements. Two drones dove straight into the ocean, vanishing beneath the radar horizon, then re-emerged seconds later, sea-skimming at impossible altitudes. One clipped the destroyer's deck railing and detonated on impact, spraying burning fuel across the aft missile launcher. 0413 hours. The Porter listed slightly, taking on water through the damaged port section. Emergency power flickered. Yet the ship remained in the fight. Its crew, young sailors barely in their 20s, moved like ghosts through smoke-filled corridors, sealing hatches and hauling fire hoses as klaxons wailed. The Venezuelan fleet, operating from the shadows, continued to press forward. But success came at a cost. U.S. helicopters, now fully engaged, fired Hellfire missiles into the densest concentration of enemy boats. Explosions blossomed across the dark sea like infernal flowers. One after another, the fast boats disintegrated under the barrage. By 0418 hours, only 4 Venezuelan vessels remained operational. Their commander aboard the corvette Mariscal Sucre ordered retreat. But the damage had been done. One American destroyer heavily scarred, 2 helicopters low on fuel, and an international incident burning across the world's media feeds. The last drone dove from the sky in a suicidal arc, hitting the ocean just meters from Porter's hull. The explosion threw a geyser of seawater high into the air, raining down like shrapnel. When the shockwave faded, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of burning debris and the hiss of waves. The first light of dawn revealed the aftermath, smoke pillars rising from the horizon, oil slicks shimmering like blood on the sea's surface, and the USS Porter listing, but still afloat. Around it, the Caribbean had transformed from paradise into battlefield. The Venezuelan swarm attack had succeeded in shocking the world. Washington's response would come fast and hard. 0600 hours, Pentagon Situation Room. Satellite imagery from the Caribbean streamed across multiple screens. Heat plumes, wreckage, drifting debris. The USS Porter was still afloat, limping toward Puerto Rico under escort. Its hull scorched and radar systems crippled. Across the room, senior defense officials stood in tense silence. The words "swarm attack" echoed like a siren through Washington's corridors. The United States Navy had not been ambushed like this since the Persian Gulf incidents decades ago. President Carter's voice was firm, but cold. If Venezuela wanted a message, they've got one. Now we send ours. Within minutes, DEFCON levels were adjusted, and the U.S. was. Southern Command initiated Operation Iron Wave, a precision retaliation plan designed to cripple Venezuela's offensive capacity without triggering a full-scale war. Across the Caribbean, U.S. assets mobilized. Two Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, USS Mason and USS Higgins, broke from their patrol routes and accelerated toward the engagement zone. F-35C Lightning II jets launched from the carrier USS George H.W. Bush, their afterburners glowing against the dawn horizon. P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft took to the skies, tracking every vessel and radar signal near Venezuelan waters. Meanwhile, deep inside Venezuela's naval command bunker near Caracas, Commodore Rivas received real-time reports. Their strike had been effective but costly. Only half of the swarm boats returned, and several drones had lost contact before impact. Still, the political victory was undeniable. The Venezuelan government broadcast triumphant footage. Imperial aggression met with Caribbean resistance. Rivas knew better. He had provoked a superpower. By 0800 hours, the U.S. retaliation began. A coordinated wave of cyber and electronic warfare hit Venezuelan military networks. Power fluctuations rippled across coastal command posts as American satellites jammed communication links. Venezuelan radar screens went dark, their systems hijacked by remote intrusion protocols. At sea, U.S. destroyers launched Tomahawk cruise missiles, low-flying sea-skimming projectiles cutting through the clouds like silent lightning. The first targets were radar installations near Puerto Cabello and La Guaira. Explosions lit up the coast, painting the night in hues of red and gold. Venezuelan air defenses scrambled. Old Russian-made S-300s locked onto incoming signatures, but decoy drones and electronic spoofing overwhelmed them. Dozens of interceptors launched many striking false targets. The real missiles slipped through the chaos. 0812 hours. The Mariscal Sucre flagship of Venezuela's Caribbean fleet shuddered under impact. A Tomahawk detonated off its starboard bow, shredding hull plating and igniting ammunition stores. Secondary explosions tore through the ship, scattering fragments across the harbor. The crew abandoned ship as black smoke rose into the tropical sky. Washington's message was clear: the U.S. Navy was reclaiming control. Yet the battle was no longer just military, it was digital and psychological. Social media exploded with live footage flaming coastlines, frantic rescue crews, and U.S. destroyers patrolling just outside Venezuelan territorial waters. Hashtags like #Caribbean Crisis and #Porter Attack trended worldwide. International reactions poured in. Russia condemned the U.S. overreaction while China called for restraint. NATO quietly reaffirmed support for Washington's right to self-defense. Inside the Pentagon, analysts projected escalation risks. If Venezuela retaliated again, or if Russian advisors were confirmed on site, the conflict could spiral into something uncontrollable. "We're walking a knife's edge," said Admiral Reeves, head of Southern Command. "One misfire and we're in a regional war." Meanwhile, the USS Porter drifted toward safety. Smoke still curled from its decks. The smell of fuel and salt water filled the air. Damage control teams worked tirelessly as medevac helicopters lifted the wounded. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, his uniform torn, his eyes locked on the horizon. "They caught us off guard," once he murmured, but not again. Back in Caracas, President Alejandro Figueroa addressed the nation in a defiant broadcast: "We will not kneel to foreign intimidation." Venezuela stands sovereign, unbroken, and united. Crowds filled the streets, waving flags, chanting anti-American slogans. But in military bunkers, officers whispered of the cost fuel shortages, radar failures, and the near total loss of their naval communications. By noon, reconnaissance drones over the Caribbean captured haunting imagery: the smoking ruins of missile boats, drifting oil slicks, and the still silhouette of the Porter limping away. The sea that once shimmered with turquoise calm now reflected only fire and ruin. At 1300 hours, both nations stood on high alert. The U.S. Navy positioned 3 carrier groups across the Atlantic corridor, while Venezuelan coastal batteries prepared for another strike that might never come. The world held its breath, watching a storm of steel and politics unfold over turquoise waters. The Caribbean had become more than a battleground. It was now the front line of a new era of asymmetric warfare. 1700 hours, Washington, D.C. The Situation Room fell into uneasy silence. Smoke still rose from Venezuelan harbors, and the world's attention now zeroed in on the Caribbean. The president's advisors debated furiously. Some urged restraint to avoid pushing Caracas toward Moscow and Beijing, while others demanded a decisive finish to prevent further humiliation. Every decision carried geopolitical weight. One wrong step could ignite a multi-front crisis. On live broadcasts, major networks replayed footage of the ambush. Satellite imagery showed the USS Porter's scarred hull, its deck torn open, radar arrays melted by shrapnel. Families of the sailors gathered outside naval bases clutching flags, waiting for confirmation of casualties. For Washington, this was no longer just a military engagement, it had become a test of credibility. At 1800 hours, the U.S. Department of Defense issued its statement. The United States has exercised its right to self-defense under international law following an unprovoked act of aggression by the Venezuelan armed forces. The tone was controlled, but steely. Meanwhile, the Venezuelan Foreign Ministry countered with its own declaration. The so-called self-defense is a smokescreen for imperialist provocation near our sovereign waters. The diplomatic battlefield ignited as quickly as the real one. In the United Nations Security Council emergency session stretched through the night, Russia and China called for an immediate ceasefire, accusing Washington of colonial aggression. Britain, France, and Germany sided with the U.S., though each urged de-escalation. The world watched as two narratives clashed, each claiming legitimacy, each weaponizing truth for political gain. Behind the public statements, shadow operations were already in motion. At 0200 hours, local time, a U.S. Navy SEAL reconnaissance team operating from a submerged Ohio-class submarine infiltrated Venezuelan waters. Their mission retrieved fragments of the drones that struck the USS Porter and confirm whether foreign technology had been involved. The findings would determine the next move. What they found shocked Washington. The recovered circuit boards bore Chinese manufacturing codes identical to those used in recent Iranian drone exports. It was evidence of a growing network linking Caracas, Tehran, and Beijing, a silent alliance stretching across continents. At dawn, classified reports reached the Oval Office. The president listened in silence as analysts detailed the chain of origin, tracing each drone's control relay through encrypted satellite networks. So it wasn't just Venezuela, an advisor said quietly. They had help. The realization was clear: the Caribbean ambush had been more than a regional strike. It was a strategic test of American vulnerability. Meanwhile, in Caracas, the victory celebrations began to fade. The reality of destruction had settled in naval bases, crippled radar arrays burned, and ports blockaded by the U.S. Navy's relentless surveillance presence. Commodore Rivas, the architect of the swarm attack, was summoned to an undisclosed meeting. The mood inside the defense ministry was grim. Rivas had achieved a symbolic blow, but it came at a price Venezuela could not sustain. Washington will not stop here, he warned quietly. They'll shift from missiles to economics. And he was right. Within 48 hours, new sanctions were imposed. Oil exports froze, foreign reserves were seized, and Venezuela's fragile economy teetered. The country had won a night of pride and entered years of consequence. Back at sea, the USS Porter had reached Puerto Rico for emergency repairs. Its decks were blackened, but the American flag still fluttered from the mast. The sailors, exhausted but alive, stood for a memorial as the names of the fallen echoed across the dockyard. Captain Hayes delivered his report with steady voice. We stood our ground. The ship still sails. Mission integrity remains. As dawn broke over the Caribbean once more, the sea returned to deceptive calm. The horizon glowed orange waves rolling gently, as though erasing the scars of war. But under that calm surface, unseen, machines still moved: autonomous drones, submarines, reconnaissance arrays, each side watching the other, preparing for what might come next. global markets trembled. Oil prices surged. Naval convoys rerouted through the Panama Corridor. The Pentagon initiated round-the-clock drone surveillance across the Caribbean basin, codenamed Sentinel Drift. Venezuela's coasts became a living testbed for modern warfare, AI-guided torpedoes, electronic camouflage, predictive radar, all silently evolving beneath the tropical sun. In the shadows, Washington's intelligence networks began charting a deeper plan. Analysts labeled it the doctrine of digital deterrence, a strategy not of occupation, but precision disruption, crippling enemy command without firing a shot. The future of war was changing, and the Caribbean had been its rehearsal ground. At 2300 hours in a secure command post beneath the Pentagon, a single phrase was recorded in the day's final briefing. The Caribbean is no longer blue, it's gray. Gray seas, gray warfare, gray truth. And as satellites passed over the wounded ocean that night, the ghostly outlines of wrecked vessels still drifted in the current, silent reminders that even in 2025, small nations could shake empires, and empires could bleed. The world had witnessed a new kind of war. Invisible alliances, swarm tactics, artificial intelligence, and retaliation cloaked in legality. Nothing would ever be the same again.